I recently read a short story by the name A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck. The book follows a man who dies and finds out his religion was wrong the whole time, and the ancient religion of Zoroastrianism was actually the right faith, meaning he'd end up in Zoroastrian hell. What do you reach for when everything familiar is gone? Then I looked at Fallout and realized that this franchise has been answering that question since 1997. These are the 7 levels of Fallout religions. The most surprising thing about religion after the nuclear apocalypse is how much of the pre-war stuff simply refused to die. Christianity, Buddhism, and Hinduism all managed to survive the apocalypse. In Fallout 3, St. Monica's Church in Rivet City is a Catholic-derived congregation holding regular services on a grounded aircraft carrier that became one of the most significant settlements in the capital wasteland. The church is run by Father Clifford, who, although spends most of his time at church, can be seen outside encouraging people to attend Mass at the same church. Clifford is especially fond of telling the sermon about Saint Monica, a saint popular among the faithful of Rivet City, described as a mother who went on a journey to be with her son, saving his soul in the process. Even though his church is empty every day but Sunday, he still preaches to an empty house. He believes that it is enough even if only God and Saint Monica hear his sermons. And many attendees, including his adopted son Diego, struggle to stay awake during Mass. The New Canaanites are Mormon missionaries operating in the Mojave in New Vegas. They send missionaries out to tribal communities to trade medical supplies and goods for the opportunity to preach to them. Most tribesmen leave them alone because they actually help a rare enough quality in the wasteland that people tolerate the religious preaching that comes with it. Daniel is a missionary stationed in Zion Canyon, living among the Soros tribe, trying to protect them while wrestling with whether God wants his people to run or fight. Daniel will spill blood to prevent the Soros' blood from being spilled. He fears war with the Whitelegs would change the Soros from what he views as a life of simple innocence into a more warlike culture, the same culture that led the world to ruin. The other Canaanite in Zion is Joshua Graham, and Joshua Graham is the most theologically complicated figure in the entire franchise. He was a Mormon missionary who became Caesar's co-founder and first legate, an ambassador of sorts. After his defeat to the NCR at the First Battle of Hoover Dam, Caesar had Joshua covered in pith, set on fire, and thrown into the Grand Canyon as a punishment. Despite the severity of his injuries, Graham managed to crawl out of the Grand Canyon and began the long trek back to his people in New Canaan. Graham's attempts to dull the pain of his burns led him to discover he possessed a natural immunity to wasteland drugs, leaving him the only option of bandaging his burned skin every day to prevent infections, a process that forces him to expose his flesh to the air, which he comments feels like being burnt alive all over again. Day by day, he suffered through his journey of over 3 months and 400 miles until he eventually reunited with his people at New Canaan. To Graham's surprise, despite the horrors and atrocities he committed for Caesar, he was welcomed back home like a hero. In his eyes, his second baptism at the hands of the Legion and subsequent survival transformed him, rekindling his faith and removing his pride and vanity. The game never resolves whether this makes him a hypocrite or a complicated human being trying to find redemption, and I think it's better left ambiguous. The Abbey of the Road is a Christian monastery west of the Commonwealth that prides itself in its secrecy. While not much is known about them, what we know is that they send out missionaries into the wasteland to spread their faith, which is how we come to find out about them, through a missionary by the name of Marcella. Aradesh, the founder of Shady Sands, one of the most important settlements to the new California Republic, is explicitly a follower of Dharma, a Buddhist. The game doesn't make this a big deal, but I just thought I'd mention it as I'm talking about religions that survived the bombs after all. Level 1 proves that the apocalypse couldn't kill what people actually needed from religion. The various religious institutions and hierarchies were gone, but the need that built them in the first place was still around. The question is what happens when someone decides to manufacture a new religion to exploit it. The Children of the Cathedral appear in Fallout 1 as what looks like a genuine religious order, with missionaries going around spreading peace and handing out medicine, providing community and offering hope to people in the wasteland. The official law confirms that the Master built the entire organization in 2156 because he needed a scouting network and needed nobody to know it was one. The missionaries spreading the word of peace were also reporting back to finding targets for the FEV program, identifying which settlements had viable populations and working out which were too well defended to approach. The low-ranking members had no idea any of this was happening. That was the fundamental requirement of making it work. If you wanted communities to trust your missionaries, you need people to actually believe the story they're telling. So the master made sure the bottom of the organization was full of sincere and genuinely motivated believers who were being used as tools by a creature that had partially fused itself with a computer network and intended to forcibly mutate every living human being on Earth and turn them into super mutants. Originally, the children were part of a doomsday cult headed by Morpheus, before ultimately falling under the occupation of Unity forces, in which Morpheus pledged his allegiance to the Master and his plan. Day-to-day operations were run by Morpheus from the Cathedral in Los Angeles. His role was essentially managing the gap between what the children publicly were and what they actually were, acting as a public face of the Unity to ease the transition of power, keeping the mission moving forward and ensuring that nobody at the bottom of the organization ever asked a question that couldn't be answered with theology. New members would be expected to spend several weeks of meditation and fasting before approaching an elder for acceptance into the ranks of the faithful. Alternatively, a prospective child could volunteer to an elder for service work, including healing the sick, feeding the hungry, and teaching the young. Accepted members were expected to keep their minds healthy and pure. To achieve this, the cathedral prescribed alcohol and drug use. I don't see that going particularly well though. Maybe it's just me. In return for their service and discipline, the cathedral will provide for all of their needs. As a religion, the children of the cathedral had 3 core beliefs. 1. The nuclear weapons that had scorched the earth were holy because they had destroyed the evil and decadence of the old world. They were called the Holy Flame as a metaphor for the death of the old world and the beginning of the new. Another core belief of theirs was that human nature is inherently flawed, making humans spiteful, violent, and stupid. This leads to a self-perpetuating propagation of evil and greed, leading to fragmentation and conflict. Last of all, the rebirth of the scarred planet could be accomplished by accepting the Master, whom they refer to as the second Holy Flame. By following his light, replacing selfishness with selflessness and cleansing the unfaithful, the nexus of rebirth would be reached, bringing rebirth to the planet and allowing for humanity to thrive. Those who progressed far enough were given the special opportunity of being turned into super mutants, seen as gods to the other children. Ghouls were also considered holy, as their deformities bore witness for the sins of the past. Eventually, when the Vault Dweller exposes to the Master that super mutants were sterile and incapable of reproduction, the Master realizes that his plan to transform humanity would end humanity within a single generation. This revelation drives the Master to destroy himself, and when he goes, the children collapse along with him, because there was never anything underneath the lie to hold them together. Religion built on a lie proves one thing and one thing alone: what you build underneath the lie matters. Without it, there's nothing left when the lie falls apart. The next religion on this list was built by someone with the opposite problem: too much sincerity with not enough planet for it. The Bright Brotherhood is a community of ghouls living in an abandoned rocket testing facility outside Novak in Fallout New Vegas. Their leader is Jason Bright, who is a glowing one. These are ghouls so irradiated that they radiate light in the dark, who through an extremely rare mutation never went feral. Instead, he claimed that he had begun receiving visions of a promised land of safety and healing, sent to him by an entity he called the Creator. He calls this destination the Far Beyond, a place where ghouls like him can find peace and healing away from the wasteland and its savagery. This so-called Far Beyond is actually space. The Bright Brotherhood's plan involved restoring pre-war rockets at the Babcon facility. The Brotherhood had been living at the facility for years, preparing for what Jason called the Great Journey, practicing their faith and being absolutely committed to the belief that they are on the verge of launching to their promised land. Their theology comes from a genuine place. Jason isn't trying to run a scam, as he believes entirely in what he's received, and his community believes in him, vice versa. Something totally unexpected though is the fact that they have a single human member who goes by the name of Chris. Chris has never been a ghoul. Chris has long hair and has concluded that this means he's turning into a ghoul. His arrival to the Brotherhood has been invaluable, as Chris is an engineer who just so happens to know a thing or two about rockets. This makes Jason see him as a sort of redeemer of the human race, sent by the Creator to make up for humanity's act against ghouls. And by the time you meet him, Chris has been working on rockets for long enough that the fact that he's human has presumably passed beyond discussion. During this quest, you can explain clearly to him that he is human. His response, however, is that you're wrong. He stays with the Brotherhood working on rockets that he physically cannot travel in without dying due to the radiation in space. Jason Bright knows this, but hasn't told him this yet. Chris basically designed and built the delivery mechanism for a heaven he himself cannot enter. The Brotherhood also has a problem before the quest even starts. A group of super mutants who use stealth boys until the tech had damaged their minds have taken over the upper floors of the facility and are terrifying the ghoul community below. The quest involves resolving the super mutant situation before the rockets can launch. The game gives you the option to sabotage the rockets, causing them to explode shortly after launching. With honestly, if you do this, fuck you, you're a fucking dick. The Bright Brotherhood exists because ghouls are not welcome in human settlements. They're attacked, enslaved, and expelled from every community they try to join. I made a great video about racism and Fallout, by the way. Would really appreciate if you checked it out after this. Jason Bright built a religion because his people needed somewhere to go that prejudice could not reach. These 3 levels are recognizable versions of what religion does: maintaining community, getting exploited, and providing an escape to those who need it the most. The next one is where Fallout asks a question most games wouldn't dare touch. What if the thing that destroyed your world is actually God? If you liked the video so far, I'd really appreciate if you subscribed and liked the video. Thank you very much. The Children of Atom were founded by people sheltering in a bomb shelter in the immediate aftermath of the Great War. At the center of that crater was an undetonated nuclear bomb, the specific device that would eventually become the defining landmark of Megaton. They worshipped Atom, a deity personifying nuclear weapons, their detonation and the resulting radiation. Where most people see weapons of mass destruction, the Children of Atom see holy tools of creation. Generally, they believe the world was created when an atom was split, and that each nuclear detonation represents the birth of countless new universes. To them, the Great War was not a catastrophe, but instead Atom's moment of creation. The flash of a nuclear detonation was seen as a sacred light. What the bombs created from the ashes is Atom's world, and the people who survived in it are Atom's children. Confessor Cromwell, the most prominent leader in the early Megaton congregation, preaches from beside the bomb in the Times Square, standing ankle deep in irradiated water, delivering sermons about Atom's grace to anyone who will listen. Some members of the faith are generally immune to radiation through a rare genetic mutation. Their bodies take no damage from it whatsoever. They can work into the most heavily irradiated zones in the game without harm. In Children of Atom's theology, this isn't a biological accident. It is hard and concrete proof that Atom themselves have blessed them. Members without the immunity take right away as a form of penance, purging Atom's glow temporarily, removing the radiation from their bodies so that they can renew their embrace of it afterwards. By Fallout 4, the faith has expanded significantly. Mother Isolde leads a community that settled in the glowing sea itself, the most heavily irradiated region in the Commonwealth, the direct impact zone of the nuclear exchange. It's their holy land. And seeing this, they built their entire settlement at the crater's center and called it the Crater of Atom. A second group traveled to the island of Far Harbor in Maine, led by Confessor Martin. The inhabitants of Far Harbor weren't receptive to their teachings and eventually drove them out. The children wandered the fog-covered island until they found an old military submarine base and converted it into their new settlement and called it the Nucleus. The Far Harbor situation is where the Children of Atom get generally complex. High Confessor Tactus, who took over after Martin disappeared, is pushing for outright war against the human settlement of Far Harbor. His position is that the island is Atom's holy land and its inhabitants must accept Atom's glory or face division. Martin's position before he vanished was one of coexistence and peaceful missionary work. Martin disappeared the night after a member of his congregation named Sister Gwyneth found an old scientific text and learned what an atom actually was. A single particle of matter in vast emptiness. Not a god as they knew it, but a simple subatomic particle. The revelation destroyed her faith. Martin spent hours trying to console her, and the crisis shook his own beliefs to the core. That night, he walked out of the Nucleus and was never seen again. With enough charisma that the player can talk Tactus into launching the Nucleus's nuclear weapons and destroying the entire congregation, on the grounds that they'll achieve the vision and be with Atom. The man is so committed to the theology that he will consent to his own destruction if you framed it as a sort of salvation. The Children of Atom are the most philosophically interesting religion in the franchise because they built their religion on the real observation that the bomb created as much as it destroyed, that fission generally does split Atom, and that the universe genuinely did begin with something like an explosion. Their theology is wrong as science, but as a framework for a meaning in a world shaped entirely by nuclear force, however, it's harder to dismiss than it should be. Level 4 is faith as reframing. The same events that ended one world built the foundation for a new one. Hubology was founded before the Great War by Dick Hubble, a science fiction author who looked at the existing religions and government and medical system of his time and decided that they'd all fail, and concluded that the correct response was to start a new religion based on his own worldview. Starting to sound a lot like Scientology, not gonna lie. Hubology teaches that existence is structured around the Great Wheel of Life. Dick Hubble called the hub, which I will be calling him the hub from now because I really don't like saying the word big. Called the hub by his followers is at the center of this wheel. Hubologists are the spokes. Non-believers are the rims, and eventually all Hubologists will be called to the heavens to live with Starfather on the planet Quetzal. The Starfather is described not as God exactly, but as the universal force from which we draw our energy, and to which we feed our energy, in turn a cyclical relationship. The thing blocking members from reaching the Starfather is negative neurodynes. Neurodynes are spiritual burdens accumulated through the influence of the spirit of the dead. They are embedding in neural pathways and distort your energy alignment. The way you remove them is through Zeta scans, a process administered by the church. Advancing your rank in the hierarchy costs progressively more the further up you go. The hierarchy runs from AHS 1 at the bottom to AHS 9 at the top. There can only ever be one AHS 9. In Fallout 2, the current AHS 9 calls himself the Great and Terrible, a title borrowed from the Wizard of Oz, which I think is just really weird. The fuck? It's so random. He runs the culture of the game describes as an iron hand behind a pleasant facade, and is known for using people as tools and disposing of them when they stop being useful. His cult has been kidnapping people from the neighbouring Shy town and brainwashing them into the faith. The Shy despise him. Every NPC in San Francisco who isn't a Hubologist describes the organization with some variation of "they're fucking crazy, do not trust them." New recruits are asked to donate all their worldly possessions to the church as a sign of good faith. Hubologists' finances by 2241 are described as hugely wealthy. They have access to a computer network called Hublink, tracking AHS 9's goals, the cult finances, and scientific calculations towards reaching the planet Quetzal. The Hubologist compound in San Francisco is working on restoring a spacecraft, the ESS Quetzal, to carry the sufficiently enlightened to their promised planet. The player can find evidence inside the compound that Hubology was originally started as a hoax to make money. By Fallout 4's Nuka World DLC, a group of missionaries led by Dara Hubble, a direct descendant of Dick, has arrived at the amusement park. They believe they've located a spacecraft. The Starfather sent instructions through Hub's writings for them to find the ship and repair it. The ship will take them to Quetzal. Dara Hubble is absolutely certain this is the ship. It's a decommissioned amusement park ride, by the way. The player can help them access said spacecraft or explain that it's an amusement ride. Dara Hubble's response to being told it's an amusement ride is that the Starfather works in mysterious ways. Level 5 is what happens when the scam outlives the scammer and the true believers inherit said scam as truth. The cult of the Mothman has pre-war origins. Point Pleasant, West Virginia, a real place with a real local legend about a winged humanoid creature reportedly spotted before the Silver Bridge collapse in 1967. It had a small congregation of genuine believers running a hidden chapel in the basement of the Mothman Museum before the bombs fell. They conducted rituals, attempting to summon the creature, believing the Mothman was sending them prophetic warnings. 2 days before the Great War, on October 21st, 2077, a member named Brother Charles experienced a vision he interpreted as a warning of fire and flood. The congregation split over what to do. Some stayed in Point Pleasant and climbed to the rooftops. Others fled to Lucky Hole Mine. The ones in the mine survived. The bombs fell and radiation turned some of them into ghouls. They stayed on the ground while the fallout settled. And when they emerged, the Mothman was physically present in Appalachia. Mutant creatures that matched the legendary description of the cryptid were appearing across the region. The thing the pre-war congregation had worshipped as folklore was now a real biological entity in the wasteland. This did not settle anything. The cult split into two major factions, with completely opposite interpretations of the same creature. The enlightened worship the purple-eyed wise Mothman as a messenger, a source of prophecy and a guide to deeper understanding. The dim ones worship the red-eyed Mothman as something darker and more demanding, associated with sacrifice and an aggressive theology. Both factions are actively hostile to each other and compete across Appalachia. Every year during the equinox, the enlightened arrive at the Mothman Museum for a summoning ceremony. The dim ones show up to disrupt it. The following 2 weeks involve competing ritual activity across Point Pleasant until the enlightened leave and the dim ones reclaim the town. This happens every single year, by the way. At some point, they really should just give up. The Mothman sends what the enlightened believe are genuine prophetic visions to the most faithful members. Irradiated animals appear as messengers. The Mother of the Fog, believed by some to be the spirit of one of the original settlers, is the most revered messenger on the island where the Far Harbor sect operates. She led the original group from Point Pleasant to the nucleus when they were driven out. Whether she's a spirit or a person, she helped them survive nonetheless. The Mothman Cult is the most theologically honest religion in the entire franchise, in a specific way. Their god is real and physically present in the world, and having a real physically present god resolved absolutely nothing. The two factions have been arguing for 200 years about the correct interpretation of a creature they can both go and look at. Jeff Lane worked at the Mothman Museum before the Great War. A true believer, handing out posters and spreading the legend, completely committed. When everybody else fled Point Pleasant, he stayed behind. After the war, he started receiving contact from something. Not the Mothman, but something else entirely. Something he called the Interloper. In holotapes he left behind, Lane describes visions he calls more real than the senses. Communications from an entity he believes is more than flesh, categorically different from any living thing he'd ever encountered. He declared himself the conduit of the unknowable. He said the hidden reality would finally become manifest. After recording the tapes, he walked to Lockey Hall Mine and never came back. The Interloper is in the deepest parts of Lockey Hall Mine, a large dormant creature with appendages extending from its head and back. Its appendages occasionally twitch and it doesn't move otherwise. It doesn't do anything that suggests awareness of being observed. A thick fog surrounds it with skeletons and bodies arranged around it. The dim ones who now use Lockey Hall Mine as their base kneel before it with their arms raised, offering jars filled with blood. The same sculpted faces surrounded the Interloper appear in Dunwich Borers in Fallout 3, in Tanagra Town in Fallout 76, and on the walls of the Robco's Research Center. These faces appear on structures across multiple games, separated by geography and centuries of in-universe history. Something placed them there long before any of this was built, before anything the games treat as having happened. The crystalline geology surrounding the Interloper's location in Lockey Hall Mine was estimated at between 500 million and a billion years old. The oldest rock formations in the entire Appalachian range. Wherever the Interloper is, it has occupied that specific location since before complex animal life existed on Earth, before the first fish and before almost everything. The Interloper didn't arrive after the war or emerge from radiation. It was there before the human concept of worship even existed. He was there before humans or anything resembling humans ever came into existence. Jeff Lane called it the Interloper, not the resident or the ancient. I find that really interesting because the Interloper implies that it came from somewhere else, that it is not native to the place in which it exists, which raises a question that the game declines to answer. Where did it come from before it was here? What did it want from Jeff Lane, and did he ever find out before going missing? The Interloper never says, it just sits in the mine and occasionally twitches. That's all 7 levels. The story I started this video with asks what people believe when the universe turns out to be bigger and older and stranger than any framework they thought into. Fallout answers the question 7 different ways and then points you in the direction of a creature in a billion-year-old mine. What the fuck am I supposed to do with, it? Like and subscribe if you find this video entertaining and educative. And drop a comment with which level you'd actually end up in if you woke up in the wasteland tomorrow. I already know mine, and it's the Bright Brotherhood. Space has to be better than here. Leave a comment. Genuinely, I do read those. I barely get any. I'm still a small creator, so I'd really appreciate if you liked and subscribe. Thank you for watching.